Good morning. Welcome to the Civic Pulse with David Bonior and Brian Brady. This is episode 16. We decided to not bring a guest in because thinking about what happened this week in the news, I thought David Bonior would be the best guest to talk about the CR, the continuing resolution, and Senator Schumer, Minority Leader Schumer's decision to go along and vote for that. And I said, who better to interview than the former whip, 26-year member of Congress, David Bonior. So, David, you're the guest on this show today.
Well,
welcome.
Well, thank you, Brian. It's nice to be on our show together.
Sometimes you don't have to go far for your guest.
That's right. Sometimes they come to you or the issue comes to you. So here we are in this mess that we're in.
And we got to talk a little bit about Bernie Sanders and the governors out here doing stuff and how the Democrats are trying to rebuild. I think some making some really strong moves and some making some pretty questionable moves. But let's start with Chuck Schumer. I want to give Chuck Schumer the benefit of the doubt for the start of this show. We might after 10 minutes we might not want to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
But he deserves it after many, David, why did he cave? Why did he surrender? Why did he give up? Is there a logical case to be made for?
Well, I think he, I would, if I had been in the House, I would not have voted the way that Chuck wanted people to vote. I mean, I think it was not the right decision. But I will say this, though. I think you have to be open to his arguments. And so I've been reading a little bit about what he actually did say. And the arguments he did make. There was a interview piece in the New York Times this morning with Lulu Navarro from NPR that was really worth I think reading. But basically he said, and I'll quote it for you: the shutdown would shut down all government agencies, and it would solely be up to Trump and Doge and Musk what to open again, because they could determine what was essential. So their goal of disseminating the whole federal government, of cutting agency after agency, would occur under a shutdown. 2 days from now, in a shutdown, they could say, well, food stamps for kids is not essential. It's gone. All veterans offices in rural areas are gone. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, they're not essential. We're cutting them back. So it'd be horrible. The damages they could do under shutdown would be much worse than the bill. So it does give you pause. And he did have a little bit of cover with his whip, who's number 2 position in the Senate, Dick Durbin from your state of Illinois. And I think he got 8 others in addition to those 2. So they had 10. But, the argument that he's making is indeed possible. I mean, Trump wanted the shutdown, and so did Musk. And maybe for those very, very reasons. So you've got to, realistically look at it and say, well, what does he have a point here? I think the big problem was it was not done in a coordinated fashion. Mm-hmm. There wasn't the discussions that were necessary between the House and the Senate, because the House only had one Democrat side with the Republicans out of 214, only one. And so,
Jeffries had to whip.
That was a hard whip. That was a hard whip, and he got it done, and everybody stayed together. And then all of a sudden, I was an old quarterback in high school and in college, played football, and you can call audibles at the line, but the audible is for everybody to hear it, right? You don't go up to the receiver and a running back and say, "Listen, I want you to flare here, and I want you to do a little curl in over here." And we're not telling anybody else, and we're going ahead and we're going to do that way. Well, it doesn't work that way. You've got to be all together. You practice together. You have a game plan and a strategy that you think you're together on. And then it gets yanked at the last second. It causes really a lot of heartburn and dissension in the clubhouse. This is a guy's show. We're going to talk sports metaphors. So I think that's
nothing I like better than a good sports metaphor.
So that's what I think happened, And,
but the clubhouses, there's 2 clubhouses in Congress, and sometimes they're
Right.
They're together. David, you popped off for a second. The Senate and the House, they have different cultures. And did you ever get burned by your Senate colleagues? And what was the relationship between the Senate Dems and the House Dems historically?
Well, first of all, you got to remember that a lot of the guys in the Senate and women were House members. Schumer was a House member. Durbin was a House member. So they know the culture in the House, and so they're a little careful about it. But obviously not in this situation. And so,
Jeffries,
yeah, there is a lot of animosity. There's a feeling that they're considered the quote unquote upper house, whatever that means, and whoever decided to use that phrase. But so there is a competition in that regard, especially when you have bills that chairmen and chairwomen in different committees work on and in the House, and then gets over to the Senate or vice versa. And then you have competition based upon what's going to be in or not in the bill. That just naturally forms a competition and an attitudinal problem between the House and the Senate.
One of your arch nemesis was Newt Gingrich, and you kind of successfully took him down after many years of. But he tried to shut the government down and paid a huge price for it. Do you see any parallels between your time in the 90s fighting Gingrich and that shutdown and what Schumer was trying to avoid?
Well, that wasn't necessarily an inter-Congress rebuff, the House against the Senate. It was a rebuff by Clinton. It was 95. Republicans just took over the House of Representatives, and I think the Senate too, after 40 years of having control of the Congress, 40 years in a row. And we got creamed in that election. We lost 50-some House seats. And Gingrich became the Speaker, and he had been known as a quote-unquote bomb thrower by a lot of people and didn't think he was a serious legislator. But anyway, they were negotiating this budget deal with Clinton, and they were trying to get to a point where they could get a budget so they wouldn't have to shut the government down. And he was on a plane with Clinton to the funeral of the Israeli prime minister who was assassinated. And on the whole plane flight, they're on the plane together, no discussion.
Oh, wow.
And so Gingrich got miffed at that. And then they exited from the back of the plane rather than the front of the plane. He got miffed at that as well. And he decided he wasn't going to do, he's going to close it down. He wasn't going to deal with the president on a budget deal. It lasted, I think, only 6 days or so, but it was pretty traumatic because no one knew how long it was going to last or what programs would survive. It's sort of like now, but now it's like exponentially more because of what Musk and his Doge buddies have and Trump have been up to. So that the cuts now are more draconian than they were back then, if you can imagine that. So, but still, it happened, and people have been leery about taking that route ever since.
Yeah, it seems like Gingrich got burned. What strikes me about this debate, I mean, you're on the left side of the Democratic Party,
right?
Maybe not as far left as some, but pretty significantly left. I am too. But I can't help wondering if, and we want people to be fighting back, right, against Trump.
Right.
I can't help but wonder, we're the party that believes government can do good. And so I do wonder if part of me thinks Schumer and Durbin took a bullet for all of us on this one, because he could be right. Like giving them the shutdown powers might have been cyanide.
Possibly, but we'll never know. But the other part of it is staying together as a team and getting your points across. And this takes away from that. So I think
Jeffries was not happy. They didn't communicate and game this.
And he has a reason not to be happy. Yeah.
And in general, it seems like the base is pretty unhappy with a lot of the messaging coming from both Jeffries and Schumer. I mean, Jeffries can sometimes feel like Robot Man. He's so he's so careful and calculated in what he says and his hand gestures. And then
Yeah.
Schumer just feels a little bit out of time, I think, for a lot of the
Yeah. Yeah.
Democratic
Yeah.
base, right?
I
Do you
serve with
think?
Chuck, and I really personally like him. But I agree with you on your assessment there. And but one of the that's the I see. How do I say this gracefully? That's one of that is the crux of a lot of the problem for the party: a lack of good messengers.
Let's
And I think, it's absolutely key to have a good messenger, a starting lineup of good messengers. And we don't do that very well. I don't know why that is.
Yeah.
But I know one thing, and we've discussed this before on the show, is that you cannot have a Democratic Party that's viable if it doesn't have working class people, and we're losing them in huge numbers, working class men particularly, and we have to appeal to them. One of the things that I tried to do when I was there was on the trade issues. I mean, it was destroying the industrial Midwest, literally destroying it, and it did. And all these
Mm-hmm.
little towns and mid-sized towns and some of these bigger areas like Detroit, they had to rebuild, and it took decades to rebuild from the destruction of
And
those
some
trade
never
deals.
did.
Yeah.
And some
So,
never did. You went on the road. Let's pivot a little bit to somebody who is killing it on the message side. Your old friend Bernie Sanders is doing the Anti Oligarchy Tour in red states and in purple states and drawing a big crowd. You did something similar with NAFTA
well,
back in
we
your
did on the
time.
trade thing. Speaking of what I just mentioned, yeah. After NAFTA passed narrowly in the Congress in what was it, 93, in November of 1993, November 17th. I remember that day very well. Uh, uh, we decided a year later, let's go see how this has worked. I mean, they said it's going to do A, B, C, and D. So we got a bus. We got some publicity people to help us with it. And there were four of us basically that did the trip. Myself, John Lewis,
Mm-hmm.
I think Sherrod was on maybe at the trip, Sherrod Brown,
Mm-hmm.
and Bernie. Oh, and Peter DeFazio of Oregon, and Bernie. 4 or 5 of us, and Karen Congresswoman from Florida was also helpful in all of that. Yeah, oh, and I guess we had more than what I thought originally. We had Marcy Kaptur from Toledo as well. So
That's a strong lineup. Yeah.
we had a strong lineup, and we went to certain parts of we started with the East actually,
Mm-hmm.
and then we went to the industrial Midwest, and we went to factories, and we went to towns, and we talked to people just like Bernie's doing. We had rallies. We went down south, and we did something in Atlanta. There was an automobile factory there and then we went out west, and we went to the border with Mexico. We would talk to the people, and was it El Paso, then across from El Paso to Juarez,
Mm-hmm.
Juarez, and in Mexico, big place. Let's look at the environmental impact over there, and then to the Los Angeles, to the sweatshops in Los Angeles, talked to folks there, and then we took the bus and we went up to San Francisco. No, not the Central Valley. Talked to the farmers
Mm-hmm.
up there. So when we try to, do different pieces where we thought people were especially affected, and it worked. We came back and we had a lot of ammunition, and it took a few more years to eventually get to the point where we changed NAFTA. And ironically, it was Trump who changed it.
Now he's tearing it up,
Now
right?
he's got his own crazy idea now, so that it's just really wrecking the economy, as we've seen this past week with the market and other numbers.
What's it like? I mean, you did that and you had a Democratic president at the time you disagreed with, and that's sort of the NAFTA, sort of that pivot point where I call it the private equity liberal side of the party won out, right?
Yeah.
Over the working class, and we've been paying
The
the price since.
neoliberals.
Yeah, the neoliberal side. What's it like to go to someone else's district and do an event who doesn't want you there?
Well, we
Because
didn't go,
that's what.
but it didn't want us there
Oh, okay,
because they were mostly all people that
who's your team?
supported us. Uh, but we were in areas that were, could vote either way. Like my district can vote Republican or Democratic, and it did. And it kept
Yeah,
me for 26 years. But today it's heavily Trump, heavily Republican.
and you saw Bernie in Altoona, Wisconsin. Going into and
Bernie's doing
Racine.
a great job with this.
Yeah,
He's doing a really great job of continuing raise these issues. I mean, it's a simple message. It's cutting all these programs for working and middle income people. Important programs that they depend upon in order to give all these huge, enormous tax breaks to the wealthiest class. The oligarchy, as he points out, and that is exactly the argument. But we need people to articulate that better than they have been.
why is Bernie is not he's not a someone you'd hold up as a great public speaker, but it works, right? In this
Because he's
era
real. I
of
mean, it's coming right where my heart is, right here.
yeah,
And it's and he feels it passionately, and he works at it. I mean, he is a tireless worker. When he was in the House, he got there, I think, at 90 or something like that, and I was the whip.
you
And
let him caucus. You had to
well,
bring him
yeah,
in.
I was just kind of his. He said that I was his mentor when he was in the House. I guess I was, because I looked after him. I needed every vote I could get as the whip,
Yeah.
and we had a similar viewpoint of the world. And I asked, and so he wanted to caucus with us, and I got him into the caucus, and then also he wanted seniority on. He wanted to be on committees, and he wanted seniority, and we did that. We got that done, and I rankled a few feathers when I did that. But
People wanted to punish him for his independence, right? A little
right,
bit.
yeah, exactly. So, but anyway, he was always a good vote. I mean, he voted with the party, like Angus King does now in Maine although he didn't on this last vote. He was one of the 10, but he's usually a very reliable and smart and thoughtful man, as Bernie is.
There's a book that came out last year about how Democrats need to have a more from a Berkeley political scientist and about how Democrats are going to keep losing unless they develop a domineering style of communication. That it's not so much about the issues as we're looking for
Strong man, woman,
strong men, strong women who can own the stage. That we gravitate towards strength, and the Democrats need to. Bernie, in his own way, kind of does that, right?
Bernie does that. Yeah.
I see that in AOC. I see that in others. Let's handicap a little of who's. I think it's been an interesting week to watch governors who are positioning themselves, and Pete Buttigieg, former transportation secretary, positioning themselves for the presidency.
Right.
And then you have Gavin Newsom, who's taken a lot of flack here. But let's start with, it seems like Tim Walz has gotten out there a little bit like Bernie, going to Nebraska and other states.
Right. He's got his own tour. That's what I hope you and I can do the same thing. That I'm not running for anything, but that we can go out there and just get a feel of what's happening in Nebraska and in Kansas and in a lot of places in the central part of the country, in the red states. It doesn't have to be it could be in the South, it can be in the West, whatever. I'd like to do that. I think that's a great idea. You can't have a national party if you're not going to, you look at I said this last week on the show, you look at the map and it's all red with little pieces of blue stuck in there because those are the urban centers. So that's where we compete. But we can't allow that much red on those maps. And that means we got to pay attention. And what do we need to pay attention to? And this is what Bernie and his organization, Our Revolution, it's called.
Yeah.
The greatest name in the world, but that's what they settled on. And led by a fabulous guy, Larry Cohen, who's been on our show.
Yeah.
What they want to do is deal with the mail issue. Well, it's a big issue. Closing postal offices in rural areas. That's kind of where the heart of the community is. They make decisions and help people out there. Veterans offices in rural areas, closing those things. I mean, those are issues that we agree with a lot of conservatives on, and we ought to be talking about them and championing them. There's others as well, but I'm just giving you a couple of examples of where we can make inroads into those communities. But we got to be there, and we got to be talking, and we got to be.
I think we should go on the road to red states and Canada. And
right.
Do some Canada shows too, David.
Right. No, that was that's his Canada and Greenland thing. He's very serious about that. The president is. It wasn't when he first came out with it. Some people thought it was a joke. I don't take anything he says as a joke. I take if he says he wants to do something, you better get serious about how you're going to deal with it.
People tend to tell you who they are. You just have to believe them. And I think we've underestimated Trump in that regard again and again. Yeah, I'm looking at the folks who are putting up a fight and communicating pretty effectively. I put Bashir in Kentucky, seems to always have a good punch to throw.
Yeah.
Pritzker is interesting. If one, he has a few $1 billion, and I think all of us in Illinois were not expecting him to be such a good governor, and he has been.
Yes. I agree with that. I think he's been a really good governor from my seat. That's not in the state, but from watching him, and he's a pretty good spokesperson.
He's very clever. One of his speeches went viral about intelligence is linked to kindness. You can tell an intelligent person by how kind they are. And it went viral about a year ago. And it was just a really unique way to fight back against Trump. That the kind people in the room are the most intelligent. It's a good way to say Trump is stupid without saying it directly. So he's done some good messaging. Buttigieg is always strong.
He's a good messenger. I give him that. He's not ideologically where I would like him to be, but he doesn't have to be. I mean, I don't need to have everybody on the edge of the left. I mean, I can deal with somebody that's in the center left if they're practical people and they communicate well and they get things done. I'm for that.
He's not scared of going into Fox News and taking them on.
No, he did. Yeah, he's very good. I mean, you got to remember, he did really. He came in second to Biden. He was winning a lot of states and racking up really good numbers before everybody coalesced around Biden. That time, that Biden did beat Trump in the general, but that time, yeah.
I'm not of the opinion that it has to be a white male. I think. To run. I know that there's people who say we just got to run a white male this time, and I think if you're feisty and if you communicate well and if you're messaging well, I even think Harris could come back and win if she chose. I think. But what do you think on that? Do you think it is just too much gender, racial stuff to overcome?
Well, it's cloudy with that right now for a lot of people, and especially political prognosticators and that kind of thing. But I in terms of Harris, I think she was a good candidate. I think that she made a couple big mistakes, but everybody makes mistakes when you're running for president. It's very difficult. But I think not separating herself from Biden was a huge mistake. And she felt she owed it to him. She was picked by him to be the vice president. And, I can imagine how she felt inside, but she needed a separation because he was a problem on several fronts, big fronts, and she couldn't do it. And you would think another front he was a big problem on is that he didn't even, as far as I know, he didn't initiate any discussion with her and saying, this is how we're going to do it. You can disown me on A, B, and C. Disown is maybe a little hard of a word, but
Yeah.
you can separate yourself on those things. That should have been done.
Yeah, and she kept most of his campaign team, and she probably needed a few more independent voices around her. And now you see Walz being feisty. You're like, who put Walz on lockdown during the campaign? We could have used a feisty.
He was great. I liked him, and I think they did put him on lockdown, but I think he's a great governor. He was a good congressman. He's got a wonderful family. He's a smart guy. He'll be one of them, and it's in it if he decides to run. Yeah.
So I think we should have a new award on our show each month called the Too Clever by Half Award. A Democrat who.
Oh, you're thinking of, I know who you're thinking of. California?
Mr. California. Pre-positioning, trying to get out of the Bay Area liberal thing before the presidential election. So he starts his own podcast, Governor Newsom does. And two of his first guests are Bannon and Charlie Kirk. And he's taking a lot of heat. And I get what, you understand the pre-calculus. He doesn't want to fall into the Kamala Harris trap. He wants to position himself as not just a Bay Area liberal, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But a little tone deaf to the time, don't you think?
I think so. It's like walking into that restaurant during the COVID.
Yeah, exactly. The French Laundry, right? I think they call it. Is that the name of it?
Drinking the wine and all that.
Yeah, he's a brilliant politician, but I think he outthought himself there. Like, this is a moment of resistance, and if you're going to win the primary, but he might have just lost the Democratic primary with those moves. It's a long time. One other question on this presidential thing. It's a different era, different time. We're fighting for survival democracy wise. I think people should consider announcing early. Typically you wait until 2020, a year and a half before, right? So that would be what, 2029 or something, to announce. Why not, if you're Pritzker, announce this year that you're running so you can start to get the megaphone or fight for the megaphone?
Yeah, you can do that. But, I'd put you on a different, he's got a job, right?
He does, although he might not be running again, right?
Okay, I don't know. But if you have a job, it's tough to do that. So, I mean, presidential thing should be full time if you're running for president. And I don't know.
Buttigieg, everyone thought he was going to run for Michigan Senate, and he just declined. He's someone who could do that, right? And I do think it'd be helpful to have somebody announce so that the media, the legacy media, can go to an announced candidate for counter messaging. But we need a lot of messengers. One last thing here on the protest resistance. Tesla protests. A lot of folks protesting outside of Tesla dealerships these days. What do you think of that? And does that 2 thumbs up?
2 thumbs up. If I had another one, I'd give you another thumb up too.
I hear we might get arrested for protesting, according to our new attorney general too, right?
Well, I don't know. Somebody was suggesting, I was reading recently, it was Jim McGovern, who was the senior congressman from Worcester, Massachusetts, and a great progressive, great guy too. Was the chairman of the Rules Committee before we lost the House. He suggested, or at least threw it out. I don't know that I suggested is the right word, about a national strike. Of course, we've had national strikes in different other places. They had one in France. They actually chased Charles de Gaulle out of the country. The national strike was so potent there. There have been others as well. and they can work. I mean, they had a national uprising in Ukraine over this faux president who actually ended up in Moscow.
Oh yeah.
And they had hundreds of thousands of people turn out at the Maidan, which is their main square in Kyiv, and he hit the road. He knew he was in trouble.
Yeah, it's interesting. Let's end on Ukraine because I in some ways I think the center of democracy has moved to Europe, and in many ways this fight in Ukraine.
Yeah.
I'd like to add the Middle East and the fight for peace and dignity for Palestinians to it as well. But I don't think that they're struggling to survive at the moment.
Yeah.
But and also don't have a great history on democracy too. But it does seem like Ukraine and Europe are holding the fort in terms of democracy right now. And you're headed there in 2 weeks. What are you planning to do in the Ukraine? What's your goal out of that trip, David?
Well, Brian, as you know, you were on the last trip with me, so you're aware of what I've been up to. 3 years ago, after the full invasion in February of 2022, I'm a Ukrainian American, so I have a strong feeling about Ukraine. Lived in the house where my grandfather, who was Ukrainian, and my grandmother, who I never met, she died before I was born. They migrated from Ukraine to Canada and then the United States. So I have this, feeling about Ukraine, and I worked on Ukrainian legislation when I was in the Congress, the Holodomor, which was, a lot of people don't realize this, but 4 million Ukrainians were killed through starvation by Stalin.
Stalin, yeah, intentionally.
Intentionally, it was horrific. So anyway, so when the full invasion occurred in February of 2022, I decided to just kind of focus in on Ukraine. That's where I'm, as a gift to my grandparents who made it all possible for me and my family. And so I've been going back and forth. First year we went there, Peter Daly, Father Daly, and I, we worked on the refugee issue. They had millions of people migrate into Poland and other places to get away from the war. And the Poles were fantastic. Last year, when we went in April for a couple of weeks, we worked on mental health issues. And we did a little bit on combatants too, those soldiers. This year, I've been putting together a group of people, Ukrainian veterans and U.S. veterans. And our goal, working together, is to get some support for the veterans, combatants, and their families. They have a huge mental health crisis, as you can imagine.
Oh, yeah.
The kids and the wives of the missing husbands. And of course, all these combatants, huge percentage of them end up with post-traumatic stress disorder. So I took Jim McDermott, who was a psychiatrist and a friend, former member of Congress, with me on one of the first, I think, the first trip. And then we had Dr. Eric Trupin, another psychiatrist, who is actually doing work now. From our trip last year, Brian, Eric now has gotten is working with Save Ukraine and working with kids and others who have trauma from the war. He's got his own program that's worked in Los Angeles and other parts of the country, and he's taken it there, and it seems to be working. A cognitive behavior program, and then in addition to that, so anyway, he's got something going with GlobeSac and some some other things that are happening as a result of the trip we made. So it was good. So this year I've been devoted the whole year since I got back to putting this veterans group together of Ukrainians and Americans. There's about 40 of us, and I'm going to go back and go through all of these places that I visited before, or have some contact with, that are doing psychological and psychosocial help for veterans with needs and their families. And so once we get there, I'm going to come back and I'm going to try to raise some money And I'm doing this with Jan Scruggs. Name
Mhm.
might be familiar to some people. Jan and Bob Duback were probably more responsible for building the Vietnam Veterans Memorial than anybody else. They had the idea. They went and got the money. They defended Maya Lin when she was criticized for the design. They did, and through the years, Jan has been the memorial fund. He's been working and raising money for the education, the upkeep, and everything of it. So they know they have contacts where we might be able to get some resources. And I'm hopeful that others who maybe will be listening to this, when I come back and say, listen, we'd like to see if you would help our Ukrainian brothers and sisters who've been fighting, dying for democracy. That's where this discussion you just started has gone, and to keep Ukraine free, keep it democratic, have the liberties and freedoms that we fought for, and because they're on the front lines, they're not doing this just for themselves, which is primarily their interest, of course, but they're doing it for all their neighbors, the Baltic countries, Poland. I could go on and on and on, and all of Western and now Eastern Europe.
Yeah, with Trump receding, pulling America's strength out of Europe, the European countries actually now need Ukraine for their own defense.
Right.
Because without it, you start to get it becomes a lot scarier trying to fight back against Russia. So it's interesting to see that dynamic as well.
Well,
But
go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt you. Please.
No, I was just going to say, I love how you're connecting the trauma that, of Vietnam veterans and what we've learned from that process to the healing process. And you and I have been to Ukraine enough to know it's kind of a macho country. Some of that historical, like in healing is not a macho process, right? And a lot
there
of
are very tough people that have survived for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
They're not going to lose this war.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be disseminated like Putin says. And they're very strong, but they're up against a Goliath.
Yeah.
And they're the David in this. Two Goliaths, Trump and Putin. Yeah. That's what they've got their hands full with now. But I think they're going to come out of this because they have probably, in my lifetime, one of the strongest leaders I've seen in public office, in Zelensky. He is a remarkable individual, and he's kept the country together. I mean, this dressing down that he had by the vice president and Trump, that just made him stronger. And the fact that he didn't take it, he stood up and for his country, and he wanted some visibility in being part of the talks rather than being on the sidelines. Really over big in Ukraine, where his numbers just spiked up really high, and with his partners in Europe now have they're going to increasing their defense budgets. They're talking about a European army because of the Russians. There's a lot of different pieces that are happening, and his leadership has been kind of central to it.
One last funny note is if you look at the polling for the Mexican president, for the new Canadian premier, for all you have to do is stand up to Trump, and your poll numbers in your own country are going to skyrocket.
Yeah,
MERS in Germany, right? It's the easiest. Trump has given the greatest political gift to all of these foreign leaders. I mean,
it's kind of like this, Brian. And Putin has done the same thing for the Ukrainians.
Yeah.
He's drawn them together
Yeah.
into a fighting and a community that wants to survive. Trump has done that for NATO and Europe.
Yeah.
So these things have different ways of playing out.
I'm hoping for sort of a ceasefire, kind of that, you have a partition that is going to happen, but it's not formal. And they're like East Germany and West Germany, you get a reunification down the road when saner people are in charge of Russia, right?
Yeah, I'm hopeful that, the war comes to an end, and that's going to be very difficult with Putin. Very difficult.
Is there a Russian Gorbachev that we can get behind?
There might be,
I'm sure there is.
He may be lurking in the wings. I don't know, but look at it this way, though. I mean, Gorbachev. Look at it this way. Putin is in his early 70s. Trump is 78, 79, I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, turning 80.
And Zelensky is, I don't even know if he's 50 yet.
Mm-hmm.
Those two other guys are going to be dead or impotent in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
So he'll be around if he wants to be, if he's not killed or exhausted. And he's a very smart and sharp guy. And plus, as you know from being there, and you're married to a Ukrainian woman, she's a lovely woman, Vida, they're smart people. They're innovative. I mean, what they're doing in technology is amazing. I mean, the people in Silicon Valley are sending their engineers over there to the factories that you and I visited, the drone factories, and
they lead the world in drone.
They lead the world, exactly.
Drone technology. I think they could really be like South Korea post Korean War.
Yeah, maybe
they're sort of poised for.
Except that line in Korea is like 100 and some miles. This one is 700.
Yeah.
It could be even longer than that, actually, because they're not fighting in the northern boundaries, although they're getting there between Ukraine and Russia, but all the way down to the south, it's about 700 miles. I think a lot of people, though.
Let's be sure to do a show from Ukraine. So
sure.
People a bird's eye view from Ukraine, and then I think we need to get in a week or two. We should get a guest on who's been out there in the red, since we haven't been in the red purple states, and hear how the rebellion is going.
I'd like to do that. Yeah.
So let's look for a good rabble rouser for our next guest.
Okay, that's fun. Yeah.
Yes, that's our favorite type of person here.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, David.
Thanks.
Well,
thank you. Thanks again, Brian, for all you're doing.
Thanks for being a guest on your own show. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, David, for being here.
Have a great weekend. Talk to you soon.
You too. Bye-bye.